There is nothing more American than football. But unfortunately, football has been infected with a virus: gambling. Now, sports betting has only been legal recently, and it all started with the Trojan horse of fantasy football. Because when all types of gambling, including sports gambling, was illegal, fantasy football, and when people started putting money on it, eventually argued that it was a game of skill. So we had a statistician that argued players with the most skill will usually and consistently defeat players with less skill. By that logic, fantasy sports didn't constitute gambling, which many states defined as a game of chance. And by the end of 2017, 19 states made playing fantasy football for money legal. But it was only a year later when New Jersey went to the Supreme Court and argued that it should be up to the states to decide if sports gambling should be legal or illegal. And as soon as the Supreme Court ruled that it's up to the states, you already had states immediately allow sports gambling, and DraftKings and FanDuel was ready. But now they had to convince the states to allow sports gambling. And how do they do that? Well, they argue that sports gambling was already a big industry to begin with. And they claim that estimates of the scope of illegal sports betting in the United States range anywhere from 80 billion to 380 billion annually. The reality is that the number was pretty much pulled from thin air. Keep in mind that in 2024, the gambling industry is worth $71 billion, and that includes all forms of legal gambling. So the range of 80 billion to 380 billion seems completely off, as even the low end was still a very generous estimate. And these numbers were also used to let states know that there's a lot of money to be made in taxes, where the truth is that that's not really the case. For example, Virginia expected an extra $57 million a year in tax revenue, but in the most recent 12 months, they only received $38 million. Even today, Virginia does not get anywhere close to the tax revenue that they were told that they could expect to make years ago. And part of the reason why this is because at least 7 states, as well as Washington, D.C., agreed to let the companies fully deduct promotional spending from their taxable income. Several other states allowed partial deductions. The reality is that DraftKings and FanDuel has a big push to try and get people on their apps. And the biggest reason why is because of live sports betting. And that's because in-game betting is predicted to grow more than $14 billion by the end of the decade. And the reason why is because it encourages impulsive betting. So for example, in the state of Oregon, in-game betting from DraftKings grew about twice as fast as pre-game betting from 2023 to 2024 in terms of numbers of bets made, total money wagered, and revenue. Now the numbers come from Oregon because they keep the best track of gambling statistics. But now that sports betting is becoming normalized, and now they're trying to hard push people to be impulsive and bet during the game. Because if you think about it, you have plenty of time before the game to decide what you want to bet on. But when the game's going on, you have a quick moment to decide if you want to bet on a certain moment in the game. If there's an important play, and you don't put your bet in time, and you were right, there's no worse feeling in the world. And this to show how profitable this is. In countries where sports betting's already legal, estimated 70 to 80% of bets are made during the game. And the problem is that these sports leagues can't say no because there's so much money involved. And they actually receive a portion of the gambling profits. Because these sports leagues are associated with Sportradar and Genius Sports. These data companies sell the real-time data for games that facilitate live bets to sportsbooks, and they get a portion of sports gambling revenues. This is sports leagues' biggest leverage that allow them to actually have some control over the gambling industry. And live betting is already a growing problem because it can make it harder to detect when players are cheating. You already have 2 pitchers for the Guardians that are already suspected of cheating, and instead of throwing the whole game, it's about specific plays. Right now they're being investigated in connection with suspicious wagering activity on individual pitches in their games. Now the MLB does have a long history of cheating in their sport, the most famous being the Black Sox scandal, where the players admit they threw the World Series. But at least back then, if you throw a game, it could be a bit more obvious because you could analyze the course of the entire game, where now it's only a few plays that need to be manipulated to make money on bets. And this is MLB's main concern, not sports betting in general, but live betting. As an MLB commissioner raised concerns about the gaming integrity when it comes to live bets, he told reporters this year that certain kinds of microbets might be unnecessary and particularly vulnerable. Because again, it's just one play, so if a player makes a bet on one play, it's much harder to catch. Now that's why it's bad for sports leagues, but I want to get into more why this is bad for individuals. There's been a research professor that's been studying problem gambling for 40 years, and she equates it to being much more akin to a slot machine instead of a lottery ticket. One counselor said they have a client who gambles in the shower and in the bed in the morning. This isn't just betting on a game and watching it to see if your team wins. This is about betting on every single moment of the game. And again, they give an example for Oregon specifically. Sports bettors wagered more than $100 million on in-game table tennis bets last year, second only to professional basketball in live betting. And I don't think people all of a sudden care about watching ping pong for the sport. Now, this isn't to say that live betting's new, because it's not. But the difference is that if you want to do it before, you would have to go to the bar, you'd put up a bet, and you have to see if you have any takers. Now it's become corporatized, and they could use some more tactics to try and get people to live bet more often. So DraftKings said, we want people betting on the most important moments of every game. And this includes push notifications that encourage people to bet live. And we've already seen how social media can deliver targeted ads and targeted content. And that's relatively harmless at the end of the day. But if this can be done with live betting, this could be very dangerous. People's money are at stake, and they might not even realize how much money they're gambling away. And there have been attempts from the government to limit the control that sports gambling companies have. So for example, in the federal level, a representative, Democrat of New York, co-sponsored a bill that would create nationwide standards for the mobile sport betting industry, including advertising limits, accountability checks, and a ban on in-game betting. The industry needs guardrails, he said. They need restrictions. This was the Safe Betting Act. This initiative failed to pass, not once, but twice. And a big part of it is because of the pushback. You have a spokesperson for the American Gaming Association called the proposed bans on entire categories of wagers a knee-jerk response. He added, "Prohibition does nothing to enhance safety. It removes oversight and shoves consumers back to offshore sites and neighborhood bookies, while abandoning a system that's designed to protect them." And I think this is completely disingenuous when talking about live betting, which is something that's very unique to the internet, and more specifically, apps, which can be regulated on app stores to begin with. And in New Jersey, where the lift on the ban of sports betting began, tried to push back also. Yet a Democratic state assemblyman in New Jersey proposed a bill to prohibit sportsbooks from offering microbets. The freedom to place 200 bets within the span of maybe 2 hours. If anybody can't see this as a problem, then they just don't want to see it as a problem. And do you know what the argument was? The chief executive of DraftKings pushed back. New Jersey offers online slots, he said in an earnings call. I don't know why they could possibly be looking at microbets as the great scourge. And this is why I see sports betting as a virus. Because now it's being used to justify not just any form of gambling, but iGaming, which you could think as slot apps. This is already legal in 7 states. And it kind of makes it hard to ban because why would you ban iGaming if you have sports betting legal? And why would you ban sports betting if you have iGaming legal? And the more this gains control, the harder it's going to be to push back. The gambling industry views sports betting as a stepping stone to an even loftier ambition, the legalization of online casino gambling. If things don't change soon, it won't be long before 40 states allow online casino gambling to be legal. Because after all, we already have 40 states that have sports betting legalized. And notice how they focus on the big economic impact, the good that this brings, all the jobs this creates, and all the tax dollars it brings in. Except, to show another example, people that lived in Kansas placed $350 million in bets. Because of tax-deductible promotions, the state collected less than $271,000 in taxes. The reality is that, as long as they can fight for it, very little of this money is actually going to go to the government in taxes. And this ignores the fact, the corrosive nature of gambling. It's going to be a slippery slope. First, we allow sports betting, then we allow live sports betting, and then eventually it'll be online casino betting. Since 2016, FanDuel and DraftKings alone have donated more than $2.6 million to state politicians and political parties. The companies have spent another $114 million to try and influence state ballot measures to legalize sports betting. And a good example to see what's going to happen if we don't do anything about this is Australia. Australia only has a population of about 27 million people. Yet, Australians are the world's biggest losers per capita, gambling away $25 billion a year. That's despite them only having 27 million people in Australia. And what do you think these people are gambling on? The reality is that most gambling doesn't take place on big nights inside flashy casinos. It happens quietly in the pubs that sit on every street corner. The only exception is Western Australia, which allows them only in casinos, and it has the lowest per capita gambling losses in the country. And I think this is a good example because a pub is a place someone frequents often, and it can be tempting for someone to gamble if there's a machine right there or a pokies right there. But if this is allowed on phones, which someone carries at them at all time, it's going to be even more tempting for someone to gamble at all moments of every moment in the day. And if casino gambling gets their way, it's going to be even easier for people to bet every moment of the day. And America is 340 million people in the country. So think of how much money there is to gain from Americans. There could potentially be $340 billion a year from gambling in America if it becomes as big as Australia. And don't think that Australians don't care about this issue too. The national conversation over gambling has grown louder, sparked by Australia's Labour government proposing a partial ban on gambling advertising, falling well short of recommendations from a landmark 2023 parliamentary report calling for a total ban. Some media companies have lobbied the government to impose softer bans over concerns about ad revenue. Australians are trying to push the limit gambling in Australia, yet all the attempts are seeming to fail, with the exception of Western Australia. And Americans are becoming increasingly more concerned too. You have more people that are viewing sports betting bad for sports and for society. And the reality is, I think most people don't have a problem if betting on sports is legal in principle. But when you have parlays and live sports betting, it's going to be terrible for Americans who maybe like betting on sports, but get roped into more manipulative betting. And it doesn't help now that the announcers tell you the betting odds for the game, where before, if it was even hinted at, the announcer would get fired. Even the NBA now has a live overlay you could watch the game with to see the live betting odds. I'd even go as far to say that sports betting is the biggest argument against why lobbying has to be illegal.